All right, welcome back. We are MDEV1004, that's Mobile APIs and Frameworks in the summer 2023 semester at Georgian, and it's week 10, part 1 of our broadcast and recording. And this one should be fairly straightforward, but there's some twists and turns we're going to be talking about and all that stuff. So again, we're sitting at the week of July 17th, and we're building a UI to perform full CRUD operations, and we're also updating the API because we need to do that a little bit because our API, actually our backend, needs a bit of a revamp. Okay, that's what we're doing this week. Last week, what we did was we created a simple UI for our API, which should, for the most part, be whatever you need for assignment 3. Okay, we'll talk about assignment 3 in a second. And then we also discussed kind of an intro to JWT. That's what we did, intro to JWT, where we actually implemented, kind of JWT components to work, right? So that's what we kind of did. Well, it's not really an intro. We worked on, we'll say, JWT security is what we worked on. We talked about it, and we got it done. Okay, so we kind of proved out that we can make our API backend secure. Then this week, well, okay, I don't know what happened, but this week should say we're creating, we're building on our API. That's what we're doing, right? So we're creating a UI, to perform full CRUD, right? Full CRUD with our API, and JWT security, we'll say, is turned off. Okay, so we have it there, but we're turning it off because we've tested it. We know the security works. And by the way, the reason why I'm doing it this way is because this is the way I would code. I would code it. Do I have security working? Yes. Okay, now turn it off. And now let's get CRUD going. Okay, now turn it back on. All right. And that's what we're going to do next week. We're going to turn it back on next week. And then you'll have a fully secure, user interface and everything else. We need more UI too. Right now we only need 2 screens this week. Next week we'll need 4 screens, right? So we're kind of ramping up. So that is what's happening this week. ICE 8 is due this weekend, Sunday, July 23rd, in line with assignment 3, which is also July 23rd, and they are very similar, right? So really you're getting paid twice for the same thing, okay? So now, however, ICE 8 will include more elements that you need for your assignment, for the stuff you're doing for assignment 3. So more elements. So you'll have your assignment 3 and then some, which is what I typically try and do. Also, assignment 4, just on the horizon, is due. The last assignment is due the last week of class, along with your final test, which will be due on Friday, August 18th. There will be no leeway because that is the last day of class. So there won't be like an extension to Saturday and Sunday. That week, Friday is the last day you can get everything in. I could have made assignment 4 due week 13, right? And, to get you to do that. But I made it week 14, not because I want you to get it done by then, but rather to give you more freedom, more flexibility, so that you can schedule your work appropriately. That's why I did it, okay? One thing we need to do is we need to talk about this sanitized array that Robert and I have kind of developed this semester, right? And I got to give Robert credit because he was the one, you should make a sanitized thing, and it should be centralized, and he's right? One of the problems we have is because we've been receiving data, right? And when we receive data from our API, we get it back as an array, all right? We don't get it back as a string. That's a problem, right? Because I get it as an array, and then my model has to be an array too. Oh man, okay, so I got it in an array. So what I need to do is take that, and once I have it in an array form, break it out into something that can be kind of pumped out as a string that can be kind of displayed on my user interface. It's an issue. And so here is what we need to do. In our API, the API itself is going to sanitize or not sanitize stuff. Really depends on the type of data that we're getting in. And here's what I'm talking about. There is flexibility on the JavaScript side. So TypeScript allows you to sanitize the array and send it off as a as a string. But unfortunately, we can't do that with iOS and Android. iOS and Android, because they're strictly typed languages, and they really are strictly typed, our model class has a type that they are array types. So how do I put an array type up on MongoDB Atlas through our API when it expects it to be a string? That's my challenge. So here's the sanitize array function that we need to change, right? And we need to make this change on the API side so that it accepts a string or a string array. And if it's a string array, then we're just going to return nothing. We're just going to just trim the array down so that there's nothing inside of it and return it back out. If it's a string, then we're going to split it and do all those things. So this function actually goes through and trims the array, at least minimally, like takes off extra spaces and that kind of stuff. But what it also does is it returns that. And what about if somehow it's not a string array and it's not a string, because we might get some weird values, and we want to return an empty array because that empty array will indicate that something is wrong, right? So those are the three things. And this new function is what we need to change on the back end. Okay, so that's something that I've posted for you guys. Because without it, what's going to happen is we'll never be able to add or edit or anything, right? We can display, but adding and updating and deleting, deleting is no problem, but adding and updating will not happen because it's got to go through the sanitization process. And if I try and send in an array to a string and try and split an array, you can't do that, right? It's not so easy, right? So, well, you can, but it doesn't make any sense because you want an array at the end anyway. So we just need it to be kind of trimmed. Okay, so that is the change we want to make. The goal for ICE 8, we want to continue building our simple UI with iOS to perform full CRUD with your API, movie list. For you to do, you're going to build a similar UI for your Android. ChatGPT is okay, like I said, and I recommend using Retrofit to fetch and manage your API endpoints, and Moshi to convert JSON data. It's up to you. Some people use other ways of doing that when they produce their Android. That's fine. We're going to remove JWT security temporarily to test your CRUD operations. We talked about this earlier. And we'll add this back in next week, and make sure you demonstrate your testing in the video. And this is important because some people don't do this kind of work. Also, for the people who are watching this video later on, some general stuff after I've marked all of your stuff up to this point, okay? And I think we're fairly up to date. I think there's just the stuff you submitted yesterday I haven't marked, okay, at this point. So a couple of notes for everybody who's watching. Make sure your sound is good on your video. Some people's sound is bad, and I'm just going forward, I'm just letting you know, guys, if your sound is 0, you're going to get 0. Like on the entire thing. I can't hear you, it's like you didn't make a video. Also, there are definitely some interesting submissions, and I'm going to say it like this so people get the idea. Guys, it's easy to detect when you've worked with somebody else on an individual assignment. And up until this point, I looked at your midterm, which was the most, I would say, challenging part to mark, because some of you spend a lot of time trying to get around the stuff that I asked you to do instead of actually doing what I've asked you to do. And if your stuff isn't working, I'm going to find out. It's not that difficult to figure it out. Some of you got reduced marks on your midterm test because you simply did not have a working API, period, right? If that's the case, and this is our course, I'm letting you know that for our final test, your API functionality and your user interface will be worth the majority of the marks, which means you will not pass the final test if you submit something that is non-functional. Okay, just letting you know. So please pull up your socks, and that's just an analogy for get things done, right? Work, kind of every week, try and do your homework. This in-class exercise stuff is easy marks as far as I'm concerned. You follow the video, you submit stuff, and it goes through your brain. Don't just regurgitate the code back to me, which means that I don't need you just to kind of talk about the same code over and over again. Sure, I mean, you're talking about it and it's going through your brain, but the most important thing is that you need to understand the code. And if you don't understand the code, it doesn't matter what, that you're just taking my code and giving it back to me, because that's what you're doing, right, for the most part. Make it work. Build your Android interface. For in-class exercise 7, we just finished, there was some thinking involved, right? Because, even though you use ChatGPT, you still need to arrange stuff and make it look kind of like iOS, right? It's going to be the same thing for ICE 8, ICE 9, ICE 10, and so on. It's going to keep going. And each of these things is worth 4% of your final grade. Give them 4% of your effort. Okay, please don't just, what I mean by that is give effort as if it's worth 4% of your final grade. Like a small assignment is what these things are, right? Don't just submit something without testing it. Demonstrate this stuff on the video. Sometimes I get a video back from students from an assignment and they bare minimum don't even display everything. Guys, I want you to demonstrate every part of it. If you don't demonstrate it in your next assignment, assignment 3, assignment 4, your in-class exercise 8, 9, 10, whatever, and your final test for sure, if you don't demonstrate it, you're not going to get marks for it. Okay, I need you to demonstrate every component. Don't say, well, to save time, I'm going to, I've already prepared it for you. No, go through the process, right? Even if it takes another minute of video recording, I'm okay with it, as long as I can see the thing working. Okay, please do this. It's going to help you in the final test. And it's important that you demo everything, that everything is fully working, okay? And if it's not fully working, then you need to work with me. And that might mean, I know this is challenging, coming to class on a Monday morning, right? It might mean that. Or maybe it means meeting with me on some other time during the week. But we need to do it so that way you guys understand stuff, all right? And remember, now that you're using some of you will be working on mobile app portfolio 2 this semester, which probably requires some kind of back end, okay? So this is all stuff that's going to work into, helping you with your mobile app, which is, by the way, 90% of the questions I get asked about, after this, how do I get a job, is show them what you made. Show them what you made. And that means working together to create this wonderful app that you're going to make by the end of semester. And hopefully, this course is going to help you to build one of those components, which is the back end. Okay, long story short, I need you to step it up when it comes to, your submissions. Please don't just randomly submit. I still have people, for whatever reason, students, for whatever reason, submitting GitHub repositories that are not accessible to me. Guys, GitHub repositories, if you keep on losing 5 to 10% every single time, it's just literally just mark loss. Don't come to me afterwards and say, oh, professor, I forgot to include you. No, at week 10, this is week 10 now that I'm recording this, by week 10, guys, I'm fully expecting you to know how to do GitHub. There should be no excuses as, I don't know what happened, my GitHub doesn't work. Look it up. You have ChatGPT, you have Stack Overflow, you have all this stuff. You guys are developers. And worst case, if you can't figure it out on your own, come and talk to me. Sometimes people submit stuff like an in-class exercise, as an example, where I asked you to put it into a folder, and you're giving me individual in-class exercise. That means that I have to approve them every single time, right? I'll do it. I'll approve every one of them. But you're going to lose marks because that's not what I asked you to do. I asked you to put all of your in-class exercises into a folder. You can still fix this, okay? You can still fix this problem. It's not insurmountable. You can do it, right? Please do what I've asked you to do, okay? That's what I'm asking you to do. Don't try and do some other stuff that you think is okay, right? Do what I've asked you to do. Okay, enough of that. I want to talk about really briefly the assignment 3 criteria, because I know I talked about this. So again, really, it's exactly what I talked about in class in the video. It's not that challenging. It's worth 7.5% of your final grade, and I think it's even less challenging than in-class exercise 8 that we're going to do today, okay? Which is, you're working with a partner or on your own, and you're going to create a third version of your Express API that includes JWT security components and is able to read your data and display it in a table or on either platform, iOS or Android. You just decide which one you want to use. I'm not going to say both platforms at this point because you might be more comfortable with one, you might be a part-time student, whatever the reason, and you don't know Android or you don't know iOS, you choose, okay, which platform you want, but it's got to be displayed properly. Your Express API should be hosted in a cloud service as render, okay, that's normal. Your live MongoDB database should include a list of your top 20 movies, as specified in your assignment 1 and 2, okay? And you will create a user interface that displays at least the movie title, the studio, and the movie rating. And your API will also include JWT authentication components, but will not require authentication to be functional in your UI. Why? Because, well, we need to cover that next week, okay? And this week is week 10, week 11, you're gonna get that. So it doesn't make sense that I would give you this to do this week when I haven't taught you how to do it, okay? Oh, we haven't talked about, all right, how have we talked about that? So these components, you notice this is the mark breakdown. I'm going to let you guys read this, but for the most part, it's everything I just talked about. So please take a look at your documentation. And remember, things that are easy mark loss, okay, that people have always lost marks. You are still not putting your names and everything else, both names of students. That means if you're working with a partner and you don't put your name and your partner's name on your code, and that means every place in your code, on your API and in your user interface, you will lose 5 marks. Okay, that's how it is. You need to have all of these in place for you to get all the marks. Okay, not just some of them, all of them. GitHub, if you don't give me GitHub, it's 5 marks. So right there between GitHub and this, it's 10% of your grade gone. 10% of 4% is still 0.4% of your final grade. Guys, that adds up. 0.4, 0.4, 0.4, and finally you've lost 10% for something silly like GitHub and documentation. Please don't do this, it adds up. And on tests, GitHub is worth 10%, right? That's crazy. Don't do it, guys, okay? These are easy things you've lost. Deploying to your cloud server is one thing, and it's worth 5 marks. Some people have deployed, but they show me their local host still. You still haven't figured that out, right, guys? So now look at that. That's 15% of your final grade is on stuff that you can easily do. And here's the kicker. The YouTube video, which is worth 10 marks, right? That's the least effort that you put is in the YouTube video. You kind of do it as fast as possible, a lot of you, and you don't demo anything. Like I said, please, please do this. Some of you are not putting in a slide, right? I haven't taken marks off for this. Coming up, you will lose marks if you don't put a slide with your image, right? Your picture, and talk about, hey, my name is Tom, and this is my assignment number 3 for this course. Again, guys, just follow what I've asked you to do. It's very, very simple, okay? And when I say you will demonstrate your app's functionality, I mean demonstrate it. I don't need you to read me the code. I don't need that. I know the code, right? I need you to show me that things are working. Show it to me, right? Show it to me on your live site. Don't show it to me on localhost. Show it to me localhost means you didn't know how to do it on your live site. That's what it means, okay? And if you don't show it to me, I'm going to assume that it doesn't work. Okay, that's what I'm going to say to you. I want you to show it to me, all right? So that's what it has to work like that. Okay, and it also, something that I also want you to think about is if you're running an Android application or an iOS application, there's 2 things you got to do for this assignment, for assignment 3. One part is demonstrate the API portion. Hey, I need to show you that JWT, Tom, I'm the student now, I'm playing the student. JWT is working, so you need to use Postman to show me this. Show me Postman and show me that JWT security can work. You can log in, you can log out with Postman, and you can turn on security and turn it off. Show me that, right? So in other words, go into your API. That might mean you do a cut in the video and say, okay, here's a version where I've turned off security. Cut. Okay, now I've put security back on, and you can see that I don't have access to, to do different things. In fact, I mean, really, theoretically, you could have security on here. You could, right? But you won't be able to do any kind of update or delete. Add, update, and delete would not be functional. So realistically, you could have security on. All right. Okay, so it means you need only one cut. And I mean briefly describe your code here, okay? Briefly describe your code. And I mean that's anything new that we haven't talked about already. If you haven't talked about this in assignment 1 or 2, then this is where you briefly describe your code and stuff that you've learned, okay? And that's it. Now where it says more than 5 minutes, try and target 5 minutes. If it's 6 minutes, guys, I'm not gonna complain. Look, realistically, I'm going to play your video back at probably 2 times its speed, okay? That's what I'm probably going to do, all right? And that means that I'm going through and I'm checking through to see everything. And by the way, here's something else I'm going to let you know that I do, right? If you actually submit this thing on YouTube like I asked, I actually look at your transcript. So what you said, I look at that stuff, right? So please take a look at that stuff that you're submitting, because I can see everything from your video. What you say, how you say it, when you said it. I can look at your code. I can look at your GitHub repository. Another thing that I see a lot of times is people are submitting a GitHub repository with one commit. That's not it's a backup. Like, again, it's like you're telling me that you don't know how to use GitHub when you do that kind of stuff, all right? Or if you have 2 commits for your assignment. I'm not sure about you, but I can't make anything less than several commits over a course of an hour, and this assignment should take you at least an hour to do, okay? So, I mean, beyond, I don't want to complain too much more for you, but guys, I just really want you guys to do things the right way, and I think it's going to go a long way to, to improve your learning and your retention when it comes to this kind of this topic. All right, so that's assignment 3. Any questions, Robbie? Are you good?
No, that's good.
Thought so. All right, let's move on. All right. So what I want to do now is I want to get into my my little Mac. So I'm going to start doing that now. And I'm going to go into my remote session here with my Mac Studio. Here it is. A couple things that I want to talk about here, some strategies that I'm going to discuss this week are, how do I copy a user interface on iOS or Android? Android is pretty simple. It's just XML, right? We just copy the XML from one project to the other, and then you have the interface. Yay, right? Similar, we can do the same thing with iOS too, and I'm going to show you how to do that right now. So one thing is, I've shared a couple of files with you before we start. So if you look up at your content area, you have the video, and then you have a few gists, okay? Each of these gists are going to help us build our app today. And one of them is the main storyboard, okay? So I've shared the main storyboard with you, and it's a gist. Why? Because I can update that main storyboard, and I will do an update next week, which will include more in there, okay? Not just this information, but other stuff too. So let's build out our app as if it was brand new. Let me do that portion with you. And that means me logging into to do stuff here. I'm just going to maximize this so we can see what this looks like. I'm going to act like we're running a Mac right now. And I'm just going to pull up Chrome, and I'm going to go into our just go into Blackboard for a second to show you this stuff. Okay, so we're just going to go into our course, which is this one, and weekly content. And the first gist that I want to talk about is the main storyboard. Okay, so that's the one I want. And so I want to use this one when it comes to creating our app. Let's go into Xcode and do that. So I'm going to go into Xcode. I'm going to create a new Xcode project, right? So from scratch, right? And I'm going to click Next. And up here, I'm going to say it's going to be called MDEV1004 in the summer 2023 semester. And it's ICE 8 that we're making, okay? ICE 8. I'm not using core data or including any tests, and my organizational identifier is ca.Georgian College. And I'm clicking Next. It's going to ask me where I want to put it, and of course I want to put it in the right spot, which is going to be on MDEV1004, M2023, ICEs. All right, which is basically what's happening here. Okay, that's what's going on. And this is where it's going. So when it comes to the main storyboard, right, now that I've created it, I'm going to close down Xcode for a second. And I'm going to bring up Visual Studio Code. Here's Visual Studio Code. What I want to do with it is I want to grab the application, as an example, from our ICEs folder. Here's our ICEs folder. And I'm going to grab this ICE 8 application and just drag it into Visual Studio Code, please. All right? And what this is going to do is, if you look inside of ICE 8, you see a couple things. One of them is this base lproj folder. The base lproj folder also has the main storyboard here. This is what our main storyboard would look like, right? So there's some stuff to do to build up this project to make it work with the stuff that I've given you. What I want you to do is I want you to go into the gist, right, to make this quicker. Here's my gist. And for main storyboard, I'm going to copy this one. And I'm going to go into Chrome and paste it in, right? Oh, not that. I want the gist. So I want to copy the link address. That's what I want. And paste it in here. There we go. And the gist looks like this. Okay, so this is the gist. It's up on GitHub. GitHub also supports single files, like we've talked about perhaps before. And what I want to do is go into raw mode here and select all, copy it, and go back to my Visual Studio Code, select all, and just overwrite, paste it, and save. What this does is it creates the entire user interface for you without you having to drag and drop anything. Okay? And this is exactly how Android works. I mean, really, you just drag and drop and copy paste and you're good to go, right? Now, the one thing that I like about Android that iOS does not have is the ability for us to see the XML side by side, XML in the user interface in the builder. We don't have a chance to do that here in iOS, but we can use a tool like Visual Studio Code to help us get through it. Okay, so that is your main storyboard. Okay, that's number one. Next, we're going to build our project right from Visual Studio Code. Okay, so the next part is notice that there are a few Swift files that are here, right? Well, if I go back to the gist just for a second, so let's go back to these things. You can see that it's the main storyboard, but there's also a way of downloading the zip or embedding the script or doing all this other stuff, right? But what we really want to do is if I go back to, I'm just going to look at all my gists for a second, okay? And this is one of them. The other one that I want to do is add in the CRUD view controller and the add edit CRUD controller. So let's add them in right away. So I'm going to go into CRUD view controller. That's what it's called, right? And what I want to do is I want to create this file inside Visual Studio Code. Right, so it's a different way of doing things than what we've done before. So again, back to Visual Studio Code, okay, as I'm building my project. And I'm just going to make sure that I've clicked on this main directory for ICE8 and clicked on a new file. And I'm going to call this CRUD view controller.swift. Okay, there it is, CRUD view controller. So all in Visual Studio Code. And then back to this. Here's my CRUD view controller.swift. I'm going to go raw. I'm going to select all here. I'm going to copy it and go back to VS Code and paste it in there and save. Okay, so why am I doing this? It's going to save us a pile of time, and I want to discuss the code with you as opposed to typing it in manually. I think that's going to take a very long time to do things properly. There could be a lot of different things. And that's why one thing I want to do is, so CRUD view controller. Also, I want to show you a different way of copy pasting or recreating your projects or whatever from scratch. Okay, so that's CRUD view controller. Next, let's do the next file. So I'm going to add a new file in there, and we're going to call this the add edit CRUD view controller .swift. Okay, add edit CRUD view controller .swift. And if you go back to our, again, everything is here. All the links are right here for all this stuff I'm getting, right? There's your added CRUD view controller. There's your, your CRUD view controller. I'm going to get all that stuff in there. So again, back to me, I'm going to go, because I own this thing, I can go swim back to all of my gists, and I can get to this one now. And I'm just going to select that one, select all, copy it, go back into Visual Studio Code, and paste it in. And now we have that one as well, okay? So that's the add edit CRUD view controller, right? So I got those two. I need more. I need the movie custom table view cell for the movie, right? And I called that, if you remember here in the thing, it's called the movie table view cell. Movie table view cell. I'm just going to copy the link address for this one because I don't want to swim around in my gists. There is the movie table view cell is what it is. Now notice here, there are text fields. Last time we got together, I made them text views. They're totally different. Here, they were labels before, now they're text fields, right? So again, raw it, go here, copy it, go back, right? And make a new file, which we're gonna name, again, movie table view cell. Okay, so again, up here, new file, movie table view cell .swift, and then paste it in. And there's our movie. You can see that, or a custom cell for the movie, save. Okay. One thing that you notice is that Visual Studio Code doesn't have all those connections and everything else that Xcode does. That's what Xcode gives you. It gives you the little circles that tell you you're connected. Okay. We're almost done. We have, I think, one more file to grab, right? Which is our movie, the movie, thing itself, right? So movie.swift. So I'm going to right-click, add a new file. We're going to call it movie.swift. And movie.swift, again, if you notice what that is, it is the model class for this one, and it's changed a little bit, only slightly, and I want to talk about how this works. I only added in an ID for the movie class. I didn't add anything else in there. I know Robert went kind of an extensive way of doing things, but I'm going to show you how this works just fine. And so I'm just going to copy paste that. So that is your, your stuff that's in here. Okay, so that is everything you need. Those are all your files. Now, the challenge. Will this work when we bring it up into Xcode, right? Because I'm sure some of you are doubtful. You're like, wait, you did it, you constructed all this in Visual Studio Code? Yes, I did. Yeah, I did. And actually, look how easy it is, right? And Xcode actually gives me some errors, and Visual Studio Code doesn't give me errors right now. And I don't want errors. I just want to be able to use it as a vehicle to copy paste and make sure I can construct my app. This is really great when it comes to I want to copy my interface from one project to the other. It takes me a few minutes, and now we're ready to go. Now I can close Visual Studio Code down, right? But not before I make sure I save everything. So, and I put this up on GitHub. So first I want to make sure that I save everything. So make sure that every one of these things doesn't have a circle next to it, and mine looks like it's okay. I'm going to use Control backtick here, and I'm going to say git add dot, git commit -m, and we'll say added project files for ICE 8. Okay, git push. Okay, so here's something. It says the work has some stuff that I don't have locally. Okay, this is what it says. The work online has some things that I don't have locally. I could pull that work, so I can say git pull first to see if there's anything that hasn't been done. And it says that Fatal need to specify to reconcile divergent branches. Okay, so what do you do there? Because it says when I'm pulling, take a look at this. It says you have divergent branches and need to specify how to reconcile them. You can do so by running one of the following commands. Sometimes before your next pull, git config pull rebase false, and it tells me all this kind of stuff to do. And it also says you can replace your git config with git config -- global, or set a default preference for all repositories, where we can rebase and all that kind of stuff. I'm not doing that. The easy way to do this is let's move this project out of this folder temporarily and put it back. Okay, so that's what I would do. So back to this. So my solution to this problem is I have ICE 8 here, and I'm just going to move this ICE 8 from here to another folder. So I'm just going to grab another version of my stuff, another finder, and temporarily, just for a second, I'm going to go to my desktop and drag and drop my ICE 8 in there, okay, just temporarily. Okay, now ICE 8 is gone, and now I can do the pull that's in there. So back to VS Code, right? We can go in and drag and drop that whole project folder for the whole ICEs folder, right? For this one, there it is. And you can see I got all my ICEs in here, and now I can do that that pull. Let's do that. So if I do a pull, git pull, then it's going to say, well, there's all this stuff. I can also do a git stash first. Git stash. If I have my stuff somewhere else, there's git stash. And then I can do a git pull. Right? And it says, well, it's divergent and blah, 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 and all this kind of stuff, right? So how do I resolve this problem? Robert, what do I do? Well, I could delete this part right here because guess what? Because I stashed it. And first, let's always check to see if I have a backup because I don't want to be doing this work again. There's my ICE8, nicely saved from another folder. If I delete ICE8 from here, so I kind of do a delete, right? Here's move to trash, right? And I do a git add dot. Let's do a git add dot, git commit -m, and we'll say resolving conflicts. There it is. And then I do a git. So let's do a git status. Here's our git status. And it says your branch, origin, main have diverged, and you have 2 and 1 different commits each respectively. Use git pull to merge the remote branch into yours. Now it says nothing to commit. So how do I merge my branch, right? And when it says my remote branch, if I do git branch, right, here's my git branch, it just says main. I only have 1 branch, right? So how do I do it? How do I come about doing this kind of stuff? Because at the end of the day, right? At the end of the day, I gotta figure this out. I can't do a git pull, all right? Because git pulling, I'm gonna get this, right? So if I do this, if I say git config, what it says here, pull.rebase, true, right? That'll rebase my branch, all right? And then if I do git pull, now it's going to be okay. Successfully rebased and updated references and head. Okay, that's definitely a way of doing it, okay? And then if I do a git status, you can see that your branch is ahead of origin made by 2 commits. I'm okay with that because that means locally I'm good, right? And if I was to do a git pull, it's going to say current branch is up to date and there's nothing I can do. Now we can copy the stuff back in. We can do that. So let's do that. So if I take this ICE8 and pull it back into, ICEs. Watch this. So here's my ICE8, pull it back into ICEs. Here it is. Now I can say git add dot, git commit -m, we'll say added project files back in for ICE8. That's what I did. Git push. Does it work? Yes. Okay, so I've resolved the problems, and now the remote branch is in sync with my local branch. This is important, okay? Whew, wonderful. We're good. However, we had an API last time that we were working with that needs updating. Remember I told you that we have to update our backend API, right? And our all that stuff. Well, let's take a look. So what I had before with ICE7B, this is ICE7B, remember we did this? That's not changing this stuff, so I'm not really going to make a big change, but I need to make ICE8B. Remember, I have ICE7B, I need to make ICE8B. Let's do that. So just going to go in here. This is before we do anything else, okay? So I'm going to take ICE7B, I'm going to copy it, I'm going to paste it, I'm going to rename it ICE8B. ICE8B is going to be our API update. There's ICE8B. Okay, we need to pull that into Visual Studio Code. ICE8B, here we go. What is ICE8B and what was it? Well, remember last time we got together, there's our package.json. Let's update this. This should say ICE8. Here's our ICE8. Okay. And version, really, one thing I forgot to do is update this version. It should be 8, 0.08. I keep forgetting that. So that's one thing that we want to put in here. And something else that I want to talk about is those changes I discussed that we need to put in the server. So here are the changes in the server. If you go to our controllers, and if you look at our movie.ts, right, then here is the updated utility function. I've already done it. Look, here's the updated utility function that I copied in. This is what I want you to do. Copy in this utility function on top of this one, okay? Then the other changes that you need after you copy this in, you need to change the way your update and your add work. So let's go to that update and add, those update and add components. All right, so I'm scrolling down until I get to the add movie. Notice now that add movie sanitizes the array, and we don't cast request.body.genre directors or writers or actors as anything. We just pass it in. The reason why we have to not cast is because we can't tell TypeScript it's a string anymore. It may not be. The request.body comes from iOS or Android, right? And your request.body could be formatted as an array, inbound, right? Which means I can't cast it as a string here because it'll break down the stuff that you're getting. TypeScript will complain, and it could break something in the back end. Chances are not, but it could do that. So this is your add movie now. You need to remove the casting that we had in there, and all we're doing is sanitizing our array. This is kind of our ultimate update for your little function, Robert, okay? And then down in here, it's the same thing for update. You need to remove cast, any kind of casting for this. Okay, so that's the only thing we need to do. Now that we have this, I'm going to save. And I'm just going to go to backtick, and I'm going to say git add dot git commit -m. We'll say updated the API. We updated the API, but what we did was we added a new version, or created a new version of the sanitize array function. Okay, git push. Here's something else we have to do, right? It's not just about doing this, but we also got to turn off security for what we're going to do, because today we're going to be doing full CRUD. Well, your security modules are here in your routes. Take a look. I've already done this removal for you before we got here today. So normally we would have something that looks like this, right? We can't have this, so we need to do something that looks like this. So let's just comment out this part right here. So the security is just turned off for today, okay? Because we're doing full CRUD operations. So I'm just going to copy paste this one. So copy and paste. So we know it works from last week. We got to this point where now we're just turning it off. Now, couple things that we forgot to do. One, I didn't do any TypeScript conversion. So we have to do that too. So let's do that. So save, control backtick. Let's turn on TypeScript. So we're going to say tsc-w, which is going to compile everything in TypeScript. That's important to do. All right. And then we're going to do another update where we're going to say git add dot git commit -m. We'll say removed, or we'll say temporarily removed JWT security. Actually, that's not true. What we did was we removed security, removed access security. That's all we did. Git push. There we go. Okay? So we removed access security. And what that means is that now your router will show, you'll be able to see everything in your router. Let's also do a git status. I see something else that's going on. It says that we modify the DB store. That's okay. I don't care about that. Are you with me? So there's really two changes. One, you need to put in an updated version of your sanitize array function in your controller. Then you need to turn off security here, or allow access to add, update, and delete. If you don't do that, add, update, and delete will fail, And you'll be like, hey, how come it's not working? I did something wrong. You didn't do anything wrong. You're just blocking it on the back end, right? Okay. So this is good. This is good. All right. Now there's something else I got to talk about. My dirty little secret. I shared the same code base with the other class, 1001, right? That means like not this code base. I shared the back-end database with the other class. Guess what they did with that database? They mangled it, right?
Oh, they broke your database?
They broke my database. So let me explain how to fix that. We're going to do the same thing as we did last time. So first, I'm going to go here and just to fix my stuff, I'm going to go into MongoDB Atlas here, right? I always look it up. I should really just make a link. But here's MongoDB Atlas. And I'm going to just sign in. So here, not sign in, sign in, I meant, not sign up with Google. Sign in, there we go. And I want to take a look at our project, right? Our project is called MDEV1004 M2023, right? There's our project. And then when I go to browse collections, right, you're going to see a movie collection that is just broken. You look at it, there's three the things there, and people have broken stuff. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to erase everything, right? I'm going to go through and erase all of these things, delete all of my documents right now. I could drop the database too. I'm not going to do that. I find that's a little bit worse. And then let's just delete this and then start over. So I went through this because I shared my back-end stuff for the in-class exercise that I gave the other class, and they mangled it. I'm okay with it, I guess. But I mean, guys, and if you're watching and you're from the other class, probably not. But if you are, what the heck? All right? You couldn't make your own little movies? You had to delete mine? Well, it's okay. It's easily fixed. So we're going to do here, this is how it works. One thing that we need to do, we have our movies.json. Remember, the command is this. Mongo import, right? And then it's dash D is equal to movies. Dash C is equal to movies. Dash dash type is equal to JSON. Dash dash JSON array. Followed by the link, which is going to happen right here. So if I go to this is my link right here. So I can just grab this part. Control C, Control V, followed by the name of my file, which is /movies.json. Okay, and if I do that, and if I did everything right, it's going to do 10 documents imported up online. And if I go back, and if I refresh this, we're going to see all of my movies are back. That's why I have that file, by the way. So I don't have to do this over and over again. Okay, so that's great. So now I have my movies back. So I have my movies back. Everything's ready to go. Okay? So we've done all this. We've actually put all this in. Now it's a matter of testing out our stuff. And by the way, this file that I'm working with, this is our API, but we need to have a separate thing on our live site. The API and the live site are totally different. This is something we're working with on the GitHub repository for this piece, but you need a separate GitHub repository for the live site, right? Let's go there. So I'm going to go to here, and I'm just going to go to one level, and I'm going to go to your live site. Here it is. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to pull, because I've already done this work. So I'm going to say git pull. And what it did was it updated the live site with all the stuff we just did. All those things, those changes we made. And I want to show you this to prove to you this is the case. If I go to controllers, and if I go to movie.ts, you can see that I have the new sanitize array function, and I also have everything else that I have. Think about what we're doing here, normally, here's our sanitized stuff that we did. Our live site is the thing I pushed to render, right? I'm not pushing my other stuff directly. Why? The other stuff I'm doing, if you think about it, is my staging area. I stage all the API changes somewhere. I test them locally. I test them with, remotely, and then I push everything up to render. I don't push to render directly over and over again. That's bad, right? And so this is my live site that I would push to render. I've already pushed to render. It's already done, okay? So all the changes have been done for you. Okay, so you have to do that. You have to push to render, and yours might be happening right now. But for me, this is already done. Okay. And to prove this out, I pushed it out last night, but let's go to render to show you. So if I go to render.com, and if I go to my dashboard, then you're going to see that my live site was pushed 11 hours ago. That's when I did it, right? And all it did was it pushed it out so that way I can go to my live site, which is this one right here. So I'm just going to I'll just click on it, make a new list. So what this is going to do is notice what happens with render. It'll turn off, right? So I'm turning it back on again right now before I even start my Xcode project. Because what I want to do is I want to make sure I remove all the possible problems I might have with Xcode. I'm doing that way ahead of time. Okay. Now let's wait for this to kind of turn on. We know what we're going to get with this. We know we're going to get an error right now. And when you get cannot get, that is a good error because it means that it's an API. That's what this thing is. I can say now API/list, which should give me a list of all my movies in nice format. Now, here is the problem that we had last time. The problem that we had with some of you who were doing i7 was this stuff. Success, true, message, movie list displayed successfully. Without these two pieces, and guess what? This is an object that we checked. And then inside you have a data property where all the actual movies are. Okay, that's why people had issues with their API when they loaded it, because this is the more complex version of my data. To fix your problem, you could literally have just taken out all those JSON statements and just outputted JSON every single time, right? The reason why it didn't work with my model class the way I had it was my model class, because I was reading the entire JSON file, I was giving you an improper format. The improper format is because it has a problem decoding the JSON. The JSON object that I'm getting back has 3 pieces to it, high level. It's an object that I'm getting back, number one. I get a success property, right? That's right here. There's my success property up here, right? I get a message property, which is something that we weren't prepared for before. And then I get my data property. And my data property is really an array of all the movies. That's where I really want things from, the data property. So it was really all about my formatting. That's why I said improper format. It means I can't decode this, Tom. What you're telling me and what you're giving me are 2 different things. Okay. Back to my code now. So now that I know this is working, finally let's launch Xcode again. And I'll pull up this thing. So here's Xcode. A couple things to note. I don't want to make this app for Mac. So Mac, see you later. I don't care about that. Okay? iPad, I don't care about that either. Let's get rid of that too. So only iPhone is what I'm making it for. Number 1. I'm using iOS 16.4. That's okay, right? And my app category, I'm not going to put this up on the App Store, but if I did, right, it's education. Right? That's what I'm doing. I mean, you could make it so it's entertainment, as an example, because it is kind of an entertainment where you're looking at movies and whatever. It's up to you, right? And your bundle identifier is kind of reflective of a unique identifier, but you could change your display name if you're going to output this to whatever you want, right? For example, favorite movies. Okay. Now, I have my view controller and my main storyboard, but oh man, where's all the rest of the stuff? What happened to my other files? Remember I added in like those other files? Where are they? How come they're not here? They're not linked to the project, right? So how do I add them in? How do I do that? Can I simply just drag and drop? What do I do, right?
File, add
What was that? So if I go to File, and then I go where? Add files to this, right? And then it says, okay, what files do you want to add? Well, okay, now we can expand this little thing. So files adding is like adding existing file. That's what it is, right? In Visual Studio proper, we had a bunch of files we could add in. So here's something we can add. The CRUD view controller we want to add in. We want to add our movie.swift and the add edit view controller, right? So how do I select all these files at the same time, right? Because I want to kind of shift select. I want to kind of do all that, but I don't want to select other stuff. I want to select some stuff, but not other stuff. So how do I do that? Command button down, right? So if I go here, let's try this again. So that one, I want this one, I want this one, and this one. Those are the 4 files I just added in. The rest exist already. They have a scene view controller, a view controller.swift. I'm going to get rid of this view controller.swift in a second, right? Because I don't need it. And then I'm going to click Add. There it is. Okay? So it didn't really add new files. What did it do is it just registered them. Now let's check this in Visual Studio Code. So back to VS Code, and this time I'm going to go into the ICES folder, right? And I want to grab ICE 8 by itself and drag it in, see what we got. So ICE 8, did we get extra stuff, right? So, you know, we had our main storyboard. Here's our main storyboard. We just copied and updated that. Add edit view controller is right here. CRUD view controller is right there. And notice that we didn't get any extra stuff. There's the movie table view cell, and all that stuff is still here. All good is what the answer is, okay? All good. And I recommend let's close off all of these, editors here in Visual Studio Code, just so there's no conflict with Xcode, please. If you're having both open at the same time. Okay, back to Xcode. Back to Xcode. So now that we have all that, we're good. We don't need our view controller anymore. My view controller came in with our project, so we're just going to delete that. So delete this one. Move to trash. Goodbye. Next, what about our movie storyboard, main storyboard? Does it have all of the stuff? And the answer is yeah. Take a look at that. It's ready for you. It's ready to go, right? Isn't that a beautiful thing? So no copy pasting, no drag and drop. How about this? Is it all connected? How about our it says view controller.scene, and this is add edit controller. Well, these are a problem. Sometimes this happens when you can do things. You have to go over to here if this is the problem, and you have to select your CRUD view controller, right? Whatever that is. That's what it's got to be. If you don't select this CRUD view controller or whatever, that's a problem. Okay? So again, notice that CRUD view controller is what you have to have over here. CRUD view controller.swift has to be existing. There it is. And then CRUD view controller.swift is what we're going to choose with our main storyboard, right? If you don't, and this still says movie view controller here, you have a problem. Here, this one says add edit view controller, and it's good. Add edit view controller is here, right? So what's the problem with this one? Because that can sometimes happen. Right, here's my CRUD view controller. It says CRUD view controller here, but it doesn't work. Why? What can we do to fix it? Click away is the answer. Click away, I think is the way to go. Kind of click away to the, even if you click something else, if you went to the add edit view controller here again, here's add edit view controller, you did that. And then you click back to the CRUD view controller, right? Then it should work. It should be better, okay? My concern, the reason why I'm talking about this is what I'm seeing is as a concern. My concern is that this should not say view controller. This should say the CRUD view controller. It should be indicative of the name of my file. So this CRUD view controller here is the main file, and it should be the way we enter. Let's build this puppy. So building is Command B, right? Not Command R, which is running. Okay, Command B is the way you do it. Command B. All right, now let's do Command R. Command R, which is let's run this thing and see what happens. Well, there's a problem with this because I'm running it in an iPhone 14 Pro, and I should be running it in an iPhone 14 Pro Max. Let's stop this thing. It still worked, but let's stop this thing and rebuild it. So let's target the iPhone 14 Pro Max. So a couple of things, right? And then let's do it again. Let's run it again. There we go. And there we go. Now it looks a little better. This is what you should have at this point. Are you with me? Nice and easy, right? So let's discuss how I did it, and let's discuss different pieces of the code, right? I'm going to start with my my CRUD view controller. Okay. First of all, actually, let's even one step back from there. Movie.swift. The difference between this week's movie.swift and last week's is that first line. On line 3, let ID be type of string. We couldn't do search by ID. I need to search by underscore ID. If I'm searching by underscore ID and it doesn't exist, I won't be able to do that. So if I'm looking for something and searching for a particular thing that I want to delete or I want to edit, I need to have underscore ID here. And this is different than what we had on our API side. On the API side, we don't have to mention that as part of our model. But here, we do. Okay? So that's the one thing we added. Next, movie table view cell, like I said, this is another change. All of our user interfaces now, instead of using labels, they're using text fields. Okay? That's why they look the way they do. Next, now that I have this done, let's go back to our CRUD view controller. So from the top, let's take it from the top. Fetch movies is exactly the same. Nothing has changed here, okay? It kind of goes through and loads the data and checks to see if there's any problem, okay? Display error messages, the exact same. No problem there, okay? Here is where things get a little hairy, okay, to talk about this. One, our fetch movies function has changed, and I want to talk about this fetch movie function a little bit. One, it's still a completion closure, so it's still going to return stuff. However, in our URL session shared data task, this is where the work starts to change. Should actually say empty response, not an M3 response. I don't know what happened there, okay? But let's talk about this. I do a do catch inside this is inside the core of our code here, and now it's slightly different. It has to be, right? So let's read the code. I'm using something called JSON deserialization. And I'm creating a JSON object this time. Why? Because of the way my code looks. Remember this code right here, it uses an object now. This is surrounded by an entire object. This whole thing is an object. Before it wasn't, it was an array. Okay? So that's the first change. The first change is this entire thing is an object. All right? And that means this is why we had to do, this is why we had to do this. We had to say that, hey, this whole thing is an object. That's the first thing we're doing. Okay? And we're taking this data, this is the data for this object, which is what we're getting from our URL. Our URL session shared data task, what it does is it reads the URL. Here's the URL. It reads it in. And we take that URL and now we're parsing it as an object. That's number one. Right now as an object, it could have any data inside of it. We don't know what kind of data it is. Okay? We just know it's an object. So that's the first thing. Next, we know that the JSON object is made up of properties. Take a look at this. This is using the JSON object that we defined here as a dictionary, where each property that's inside the JSON object is, is part of a associative array is also what it's called, right? So this right here is basically saying is another way of accessing the JSON data, just like we can do with JavaScript. We can use an associative array, right, where we mention the name of the property in the array instead of the index. Instead of using 0, 1, 2, 3, we can use the name of the property. In this case, success. If the success property is true, if it's true, that's what we're saying, then everything is good because its success is true. But what if the success property was false? What if we return back and the answer is, nope, false, you don't have access? We don't want our application to crash, so that's why we have this if-else right here. So if it's true, we're good. Now we go into another if statement. The if statement inside here is going to say, okay, now let's take a look at our JSON data object. The JSON data object is an array of movies. Now we're back to what we did last week, where we're basically saying we want to make it so that we're going to store an array of movie data right here. Movies data is here. And we're going to say let movies, we're going to try and JSON serialize the data that we get from our movies object, our movies data, and we're going to try and convert it into another sub-object. That's what we're doing here. So basically it's an array. We're saying we're getting back an array, okay? Because that's what we're saying here, okay? Next, now that we have an array of strings, that's what we're saying, the next step is let's decode the movies back to JSON coder, which is what we used last week. Now this is the exact same code down here. We're basically saying take the movie itself and we're going to use the JSON decoder to decode the movies and store it in this decoded movies object, okay? Finally, we're going to change the completion so that the decoded movies is the stuff that comes back, and that's the success. Else, what if the table that's missing, we're missing data, the data field in the JSON response. If we're missing the data field in the JSON response, that would be bad, all right? Now, why did I go through all this? Because we've made our API so that it can work on two different things. We're making our API so that it can work with an app, and we're making our API so that it can work with, I don't know, React or Angular or some other front end, right, that you want to use. And so we need to keep it a little bit different. Now, this is going to be your challenge when you take this into Android, because now Android also has to account for this same thing. And my recommendation is when you feed ChatGPT this data, say, I want this is my API, show them the API as well, ChatGPT, and say, I want this to work in Android, and this is my code. I want to use retrofit and Moshi for the conversion part, retrofit for accessing and all that kind of stuff, a wrapper for your fetch functions. Let's continue. So that is the meat and bones of the fetch function. That's what it does, right? And it does else. So let's suppose, it's not true. API request is unsuccessful somehow. And the error message is the message that we get in there, right? Which in this case, if there's a message, we're going to take the message. Or if there's not a message, we're just going to say unknown error. Okay? That's what it says here. Okay? And then finally at the bottom, that's our error that we get sometimes. When we get that weird error, we're just going to print that to ourselves, which is error decoding the JSON data. Somehow your JSON data, if we get to this point, something's wrong with the way we're interpreting the JSON data. I mean, for the most part, we should never get this error anymore. Okay? All right, so that is your fetch function. Questions around this? Does it make sense? So what we're trying to do now is, because we've encapsulated all the data as an object, we need to read it as an object. We can't read it as an array anymore like we did last week.
It's easier to read it as an object like this way.
Right, and that's why I did it, because now we can add more things to it. We can decorate our data that comes back out with extra information. And by the way, why am I doing this? Because you're going to be accessing other APIs out there one day, and their data is going to be decorated. It's going to have extra information that you don't care about. You care about the data. That's what you care about. You don't care about the message and the success story and everything else. You don't care about those things, although we have to deal with them. That's why I put this in there, is to give you more information on how to get this working. Okay, so that is your fetch. The other one is the exact same. So we still have the number of rows and sections. So we build out our table. We still use our custom table view cell. All this is the exact same, all right? Where it's different, and here's new for ICE 8, where it's different is the add edit segue. Okay, so when I press on the view, let's run this thing. Let's go back to run it again, right? When I press on the table view, here's my table view, it should take me to this screen right here. See that? Okay, well, how did I do that? I use a segue, all right? Now again, it's gonna be different in Android, but for the most part, anytime I press on this thing, it'll take me to this segue. And I'm not using a navigation controller. I'm not using some other kind of tab view controller. I'm just using a segue, okay? Now, there's positives and negatives to a segue. Positive is easy to do. Negative thing is you have to dismiss it. There is no, and it's not going to trigger view did appear or view will appear. It won't trigger that. Why? Because the view's not gone, actually. It's just behind the other one. It's still there the entire time, okay? So that's why I'm using this segue. To do it, it's simple. Could there be another navigation structure? Yes, you can use a navigation view controller as opposed to what I'm doing here. You can actually embed all this in a navigation view, and it'd be totally different than what we're doing here, right, when it comes to the segue. But pressing on this, what it does is it performs the segue, and it moves from from the main screen to the next screen. I've also included a left swipe gesture. The left swipe gesture activates the delete movie method. Okay, that's what it does. So, and it also asks you a confirmation. Let me show you that confirmation. So again, back to our let's suppose I want to delete Back to the Future. All right, so I can just left swipe, and it should come up with a little message if I click delete that tells me, hey, do I want to delete this thing or not? Let's try Raiders of the Lost Ark. You'll say, hey, do you want to delete this thing? And I'm going to say, no, I don't want to delete Raiders of the Lost Ark. The Indiana Jones movie is out right now. All right? And I want to see it, okay? Even though it's supposed to be bad. By the way, they released all kinds of crazy movies. Tom Cruise's, for those people who are crazy with movies, since we're talking about favorite movies here, Tom Cruise just released the next version, 23 years later, of his Mission Impossible film. It's supposed to be doing really well in the box office already in the first weekend of release. And the other movie that's out there is Across the Spider-Verse, which I haven't had a chance to see, right? So those are the three movies I want to see now: Indiana Jones, Mission Impossible, and Across the Spider-Verse. It's the first summer that I've ever felt like that, to see three movies, like in a long time, and it's been, I just haven't had a chance to get out there, and I want to take my little guy to see it. But this is the way it should work. So now we can see that we can transition to this, right? And I can swipe, and it's going to kind of activate, do I want to delete it or not? And that swiping gesture is a very common interaction now. Okay, we're used to that in an iPhone or even an Android phone. So that's what this does. So the swipe gesture basically says, hey, the editing style is something that's built in. It says, if my editing style is delete, that is the swipe gesture. It's pretty simple. Then, if that's true, then let the movie that I'm targeting be the movie at the index path row. All right. And then I'm going to say, let's show my delete confirmation alert. All right. That's what it's going to be. I've kind of set that up. And I'm basically saying that for this movie, and if it's confirmed, then let's do the delete movie. All right. Well, let's go down to the delete movie for a second. Here's my show confirmation alert, by the way. That's another function that I built right for this. And my delete movie basically does that. It just basically says, hey, let my movie equal the movie that I got from my index path row. And then I'm going to use the URL, which is, this is the API that we set up, right? With movie underscore ID. See, this is where I needed that movie underscore ID. I couldn't have done the deletion until I had that information, because the movie that I'm selecting has that information built into it. If I didn't, then I could never delete anything, okay? And then if anything is wrong, I print invalid URL. It shouldn't do that. It should just print, okay? Then I'm going to make the request. Now here's something interesting. In iOS, you can do an HTTP method request. My method request is a delete type method because that's how we set it up on the API. Remember? We did post for add, we did put for edit or update, and we did delete for delete. All right? So that's pretty good in terms of what we did there. And of course, there's a get request for a read. So, okay, so good. So now we're talking about the method that we're going to use, delete, and then we're going to say, okay, hey, URL shared session, let's do the next thing, which is I'm going to try and delete this thing. Here's my data that I'm taking in. There's my data. And this data object is basically the thing that I'm going to delete, right? And it says I want to get a response to this, and so on. So what I'm doing is I'm going to do the deletion. This is what I'm doing. This right here does the deletion. It passes the movie ID to the back end, and this does all the heavy lifting for us. Right here, this one line. It says, hey, just like we would if we were going to use Postman and put in the ID of the movie we want to delete with the proper URI, it would just do the deletion, straight up, right? Now, assuming that there's no protected site. If this API was protected, this would fail. Okay, we don't have that yet. Next week. All right, and then Of course, we're doing it on the main thread. And so because we're doing asynchronous operations, we have to use the main thread. So we're using the dispatch queue trick again, like we did last week, where we're saying, now I want to remove the movie from the movies array, right? I want to remove that movie. And then I want to delete the rows. This is the next thing. I want to delete the rows from my table, okay? And that kind of updates my table for the most part, okay? Now, there's another thing I could have done here. Instead of deleting the rows from my table, I could have just updated or reloaded my data. All right, those are the two ways you could have done this. Maybe reloading might be even better, right? Because reloading the data, what it does is it only will display the table with the data that exists, and therefore we don't have to delete anything, okay? Okay, so that is your main CRUD view controller, the one that we're just using the list of data. And then we have this prepare. Prepare is the function that we're going to use to prepare for segue, and we're basically connecting to our back end or our detail screen, right? Which is our add edit CRUD view controller. That's what we called it, right? And what we're saying is, okay, when we're transitioning, I want to make a reference to this controller here inside the add edit view controller. So we're passing data from one controller to the other. That's how we're doing it, okay? Now, back to this. This is no good, right? This is no good because I'd rather use some kind of data model. I'd rather instantiate an object of type movie and pass that across to my add edit view controller, right? That's the right thing to do. And we kind of do it, but I don't quite do it here. Here's something else that we have where I'm not happy with this code right now, the way it's in this current state. I'll talk about this as a middle step to where we want to go. The reason why this is a middle step is because remember my motto is make it work, then refactor. Okay, we don't care about how messy our code is at this stage. We just want to make it work. And we've been building up and improving our code week after week. Okay, that's what we're doing. And so too here for iOS. Problems. We have operations that we're doing with our API, and they're in two separate view controllers. Example, we're doing a read operation, and we're doing a delete operation in one controller, and then we're doing an update, and we're doing an add in another controller. That's dumb. And it's dumb because it doesn't keep our API operations in one place that we can see them. What if I wanted to update it? What if it was more than one controller that I was doing it for? These operations are embedded in my controllers, which means they're tightly coupled with my controllers. What if I had 10 more controllers like this? And they all were going to do some weird manipulation. That's terrible. We don't want this. We want it in a centralized place. In other words, we need a service. And to create a service, we're going to do that next week. All right, where we make a singleton that we're going to use. We've been talking about singletons a couple weeks, right? I'm going to use a singleton that I'm going to create next week, and I'm going to use that singleton to create a service that we can access. There's two parts to this service. One part is I want to be able to do my operations, and then I'm going to make another singleton for the authentication piece, where it's going to take care of managing the token, storing it into user defaults, removing it when we're logged out, all that kind of manipulation. Those are all the things we need to do for security. So next week is kind of a double week. I think I can probably manage both things at once. There's a lot of bit of code, and our user interface is going to expand, like I said, to 4 screens, okay, which is way more than we have right now. Okay, awesome. So that's wonderful. This is great. This is how we're making references right now, and we're also making this a reference to this movie update callback function. So we want the add edit view controller to link back to this part right here temporarily to basically update the movie, the table. We need to be able to do that somehow, right? Because the table data has to be reloaded from here. Well, if that's true, this movie update callback, take a look. We're doing the same thing. Maybe we can call this movie update callback out of here. We don't have to do it right here. And so that way, whenever we do a delete, we can use something that looks like this too. Update, we call the movie update callback, inside of this table, right? As opposed to duplicating it right here. Look, we're doing it there, and we're doing it something similar here, okay? So we don't want this. We want it to be done in one place. And so there's another little bit of refactoring you can do next week, just in there alone. All right, so our code is going to change. I'm just letting you know that ahead of time. If you don't see this as a problem right now, I want you to think about it, guys. The people who are looking at or watching the video from, not today, right? If you think about this, take a look. We have duplication in our code right here. We're updating our table, and we're doing it in two different ways. We're doing it this way, where we remove the movies and do manual stuff, and then we're doing it this way, right? Where either we're updating the movie or adding a new movie, right? And what are we doing here? We're reloading the table data. Why are we doing it two separate ways? We should do it in one way, a succinct way of doing it. And so we're going to get back to that. Okay. So that is your CRUD view controller. Let's take a look now. Any questions around this? You good? Let's take a look at your add edit view controller. All right? Add edit CRUD view controller. I wanted to take a look at this because what this does is it connects each of these things, connect to each of the user interface items that are inside of your thing. So let's take a look at your main storyboard and do it that way. So here's what the thing looks like, right? Here's what it looks like. And you can clearly see that there's a bunch of different elements here, right? And if I use the assistant editor for a second, you can see that the assistant editor, what it does, so now it's brought up the CRUD view controller, and I want to just talk about this one. Take a look here. You can see that the assistant editor, it has add, edit, title label, and each one of these things is connected. Take a look. If I hover over any one of these things, you can see that each of these are connected to different parts of the interface. This is the thing that you have to think about. So this is what this thing looks like. Now, I got to talk about some things. Some people asked, is this the right way to do it? Should I display all my data like this? And yeah, you could. You can make it so it's a scroll view of some kind that has more data, where maybe it's too long. Maybe I need to press my button way below, or maybe have like some kind of subview, or in Android we call it fragments, where we have our edit button and our cancel button in one fragment, and we have another fragment in Android that has all the data that you want to update. That's also acceptable, okay? But you need to make this similar in both platforms. And here what we're doing is we're just having a series of cells that we're allowing you to input your data. A couple of wasted pieces here. Your title, studio, genre, and all that stuff is taking an extra step because you have a label for this. Sometimes, especially with modern design, we put a placeholder, and that placeholder is the label. It takes the place of the label, and so that you can save the space of labels, especially when you have a cramped amount of elements that are in here. So it might be something we change in the future. Maybe, maybe not. Okay, I'm just going to shut this down and go back to this. So I showed you how it connects to everything, which is important. Now let's go back and talk about the add edit view controller here and discuss how this works. Okay. So when the view did load, first of all, let's talk up here. Up here we have a movie, a single movie that we want to keep track of on line 23. On line 24, we're basically making a reference, right? It used to be called movie view controller, but I've modified this a couple of times. So now it's called CRUD view controller. And then the movie update callback is that thing that I talked about where we want to be able to update our table on the main screen, okay? In our view did load, what we're doing is we're saying, hey, if we have a movie, okay, if we have a movie exists, then we're editing a movie. Okay, that's what we're doing here. And this whole first part is we're editing the movie. We're getting information from the movie data, and we're adding it or injecting it into the text fields. That's what we're doing. So each of the text fields is going to have all the data from our movie object. Okay, that's what's happening there. Okay. Once we've updated all the text fields with our data from our movie object, then we can actually perform the edit. Okay. We've also changed the button. I'm using one screen to do both adding and editing because it doesn't make sense. They're the exact same thing, adding and editing. The only difference is the label at the top, which should say add or edit, right? Or update, and the button at the bottom, which should say add or update. Let me show you. So if I run this code, at the top, if I click this little plus button, it'll take me to this thing that says add movie, right? Notice at the bottom it says add. But if I click onto one of these things, it says edit movie, and at the bottom it says update. Same interface. We're only making a difference right here, where we're saying basically, I'm going to edit the movie here. I'm going to just change what the button and the label say here and here. Okay? That's what's happening. And the other thing is that we're actually feeding data from the database only when we're editing, but we don't have anything to edit when we're adding a new movie, so that the elements remain empty. Next, we have elements for our cancel button pressed. Our cancel button press will take us back to the previous screen. Let's test that functionality to make sure everything works. So I run this thing again, and if I go to this screen, but if I click the cancel button, it just takes me back to this screen. It's a quick way of getting back to that screen. Okay? That's what this does. Our update button was where all the work happens. Okay? Here's our real work right here. Okay, again, if the first step is if I'm editing a movie, that's what this means. Then the request type is a put, right? If we're not editing a movie, then the request type is a post, because we're adding a movie in. The difference between one and the other is the URL strings also change. If we're editing a movie, then we're going to pass in to a different URI, update, and then the movie ID, which is kind of what you would expect, right? Otherwise, we're just adding in the add. Here is where we explicitly mention the types of data. Now, I've done this. It doesn't have to be quite like this. I found that sometimes iOS and Swift, what it does is there's too much inference. Remember, iOS will try and do type inference, implicit typing. The problem with that is when you have a lot of stuff like this, where you're saying, well, it could be a string or it could be empty, right? One of those kind of things. And it has to think, especially when it comes to this stuff up here, where we're saying, hey, ID is actually a UUID, and we want to make it we want to get the UUID string. The UUID is what we're getting from our MongoDB atlas, right? So we're defining the type. So once we defined all the types, that's what this is. Then, and we're getting the data, we're feeding the data into these things, into these variables here. Then we're taking these variables and constructing a movie object here separately. Now, let me talk about this. We could do this in one step. We could construct a movie object, right? At the same time we're declaring the variables. It's just too much sometimes for Swift to handle, right? And it's also cluttered. Like you're going to see a lot of stuff and you're going to be like, what am I doing? Here it's clean. We have a movie object we're constructing. We're taking the data from the cells and putting them in here. It's like, imagine if I took these cells, this part right here, this part, and just put it right here instead of ID. All of this goes here. All of that goes there. Could we do it? Yes. Will we do it in the future? Maybe. I might do it next week, where I kind of say, I want to refactor, right? I started off big and I want to go small, right? I want to really make this stuff really, a little bit more polished. One thing we know is that here you can see that we're getting genre, directors, writers, and actors, and then we're wrapping it inside of these square brackets to create arrays of them, okay? So why is that? Because remember that whatever we get from the user interface in any application, doesn't matter if it's .NET or if it's like Android or iOS or JavaScript, whatever, they're all strings, everything we get in, which means we have to convert them to make them something else. Right? And this is where we're doing it. We're saying, okay, take this information that they're just strings for genre, directors, writers, and actors. They're just strings. Now convert those strings into arrays. That's the conversion process right there. Or basically I wrap it inside square brackets, I make it into an array of strings. Okay? So that's an important fix for this. Okay, next. So once I've done that and I've created the movie object, and notice that doesn't matter if you edit one field or all the fields. We're still making the entire object again, okay? Because how are you going to detect which field you're updating? You don't know, right? What are you going to do? Do some kind of like, matching statement or an if-else some kind? You're going to do, right? It's just too much. So we just recreate the entire object again. Doesn't matter which one gets updated. The entire object gets updated, okay? Next. Here's the request. We make a new URL request with whatever the method request type that we use. If we're adding, we use a post. If we're editing, we use a put. That's what this does here. And then we're going to say, let's set the value as an application JSON. And here we're going to actually use the request body we're going to say the request body itself is equal to the JSON encoder type. Whatever we're going to encode the other way around, right? Where I'm encoding the movie and I'm creating the HTTP body from it. This is like us doing request.body on the TypeScript side. Okay, that's what we're doing. We're saying that the request body is where we're constructing the request body right here. All right? And this way, request.body is going to be valid on the back end. Right? Otherwise, how would it be valid? We need to tell it, and this is where that's happening. Okay. Finally, we're actually, kind of initiating the response. All right. So this is the response itself. We're actually, kind of executing the response. And now back to this in the main dispatch queue, we're going to dismiss this particular screen, and we're going to call the movie update callback from the previous controller where we update the table. That's where it's happening right here. So whenever we add or update, we click the update button, the other controller gets updated as well. It kind of reloads the movie data. And that's it. So it sounds complex. It's not really that complex. It's just, but again, one thing we also know is this problem that we have right now, which is our data management, if you will, is split over two controllers. And it's embedded inside, the code is embedded inside the controllers themselves. This is no good. This is tightly coupled code. It's terrible. But we made it work. That's the most important thing. Next week, we're going to make it better. Okay. And that is the code for this week. That's what I wanted you guys to do. Full CRUD operations, it works. Please test it to make sure it works with your code and your data. Again, you don't need this for assignment 3. Assignment 3, all you need to do is read. That first screen is good enough, all right? And the way you can read the data. The thing that's most important for assignment 3 is, especially if you've added annotations to the data like I have with a success and a message, you need to change your decoding so it looks like this. Okay, this is the main piece. Otherwise, it will not read your data properly. Okay, and you need to carry the same methodology forward in Android with Kotlin or Java, whatever you decide to do for this in-class exercise 8. Okay, make sense? So again, I recommend trying it out. So running your code, making sure you can read your code in here with this more complicated version of stuff, because we'd have these decorators that are out here, and that it's a whole object instead of an array. Okay. Here's the difference between your code and what I'm giving the other class. The other class's code looks like this. Right? I'm going to take a second to look at it. And then you can see it side by side. So you know what I'm talking about. Some people are still not clear, I'm sure, when you're watching this thing. I know it's a longer video this time around. But you're not sure when you're watching this thing what I mean by I've added annotations. Robert, you understand, but some of the people out there may not understand. So I'm going to show you side by side with the API. It's the exact same back-end database. This is why I'm saying, the other class could monkey with our code, right? Which is what they did. They kind of played with our data. Here's the difference. Look. So here's this. Exact same data. Now take a look at this. Here, I'll unhighlight it. Take a look at the beginning. Success. Watch. Take a look at that. See that? How it shifts? It's shifting because here it's an object, right? It's not an object. It's an array. The entire thing is an array. Here, the entire thing is encapsulated in an object. That's the difference, and that's why you're going to get that weird read error, because it's formatted differently. Okay? All right. Hopefully that helped. Any questions before we go for the day?
No.
Okay, so in-class exercise 8, do Sunday. Assignment 3, also do Sunday. All right, good luck, guys. And if you need me, please connect with me. I will be available this afternoon as well as throughout the week. But you need to connect with me early. And if I don't respond, it's because I'm either in class or I'm otherwise engaged. But please leave it with me and we'll try and connect. For those people who, please check your marks. All the marks have been submitted, like I said, so you should be up to date other than yesterday. Okay? And that's it for me guys. I'm just going to stop recording this one. But before, one more thing, another point we got to talk about a little bit more of admin. Just one more second. I know that I'm keeping you for one more second. I know I want to leave a little bit early today so you guys can have that extra time to do your in-class exercise. But one more thing to talk about is as we're winding out this last half of semester, remember that your week 14, which is your final test, is coming up, all right? That week is going to be worth more marks again. 15% for your test plus 7.5% for your assignment. That's a 22.5% week, all right? So bigger week coming up. Please try and get your assignment 4 finished off by week 13. That's what I'm going to tell you. I'm going to keep working with assignment 4 with you. I'm going to give you the details of that next time, I'm hoping. But for the most part, it's exactly what I said. Assignment 4 is going to have full CRUD with authentication, with all the views. And for the most part, you should get most of it next week. Okay? All right, guys, that's it for me. I'm going to say goodbye today, and we'll see you guys next week. Thank you.